The Alpha King ordered my execution, then realized I was his fated mate. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. The frost had teeth that morning, sharp and unforgiving as they bit into Mirella Tombstone's pale skin. She stood at the center of the execution square, her white hair tangled and wild against the crimson of her tattered dress, a stark banner of defiance in a world that had already condemned her. The cobblestones beneath her bare feet held the memory of 1,000 deaths, their surface worn smooth by centuries of blood and rain. Above, the sky was the color of ash, pregnant with snow that refused to fall, as though even nature itself waited to witness what would come next. Around her, the crowd pressed close, their breath forming clouds of vapor in the winter air, their eyes hungry for spectacle. They did not know her name. They did not care to know it. To them, she was simply the accused, the criminal, the one who had dared to defy the laws of the kingdom. The crime itself had been whispered about in taverns and market squares for weeks now, growing more distorted with each telling until the truth had been buried beneath layers of fear and fabrication. But Mirella remembered the truth. She remembered the child, small and shivering, caught in the iron jaws of a hunter's trap meant for wolves. She remembered how the metal had bitten deep into the boy's leg, how his screams had echoed through the forest like the cries of something being torn from this world. And she remembered the healing, the way her hands had glowed with that forbidden light, the ancient magic that flowed through her veins like a secret river. The boy had lived. The boy had walked again. And for this mercy, for this singular act of compassion, she would die. The platform loomed before her, constructed of dark wood that seemed to drink in what little light the morning offered. Upon it stood the executioner, his face hidden behind a mask of black leather, his axe resting against his shoulder, with the casual familiarity of a farmer with his plow. But it was not the executioner that drew every eye in that frozen moment. It was the figure that emerged from the palace gates, moving through the crowd like a storm given human form. Maelor Siegfried, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, Lord of the Winter Packs, walked with the inevitability of fate itself. His presence commanded the space around him, bending the very air to his will. Golden hair fell past his shoulders in waves that caught what meager light existed, and his beard, thick and carefully maintained, framed a face carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountains that ringed his kingdom. Beneath the heavy furs and leather of his ceremonial armor, his body was a testament to power, muscles defined by decades of battle and conquest, each scar a story written in his flesh. His eyes, pale as winter ice and just as cold, swept across the assembled masses before settling on the figure at the center of the square. For a moment, something flickered in those depths, something that might have been recognition, or perhaps simply the acknowledgement of a task to be completed. He had signed the execution order himself, his hand steady as he pressed his seal into the crimson wax. The law was clear. The use of forbidden magic was punishable by death. There could be no exceptions, not even for mercy. Especially not for mercy. Mercy, he had learned long ago, was a luxury that kings could not afford. Mirella lifted her head as he approached, and their eyes met across the distance. In that instant, something passed between them, invisible yet undeniable, like the first tremor that presages an avalanche. Her breath caught in her throat, and for reasons she could not name, her heart began to race, not with the fear of impending death, but with something else entirely. Something that felt ancient and new all at once, like remembering a dream from a life she had never lived. Maelor's stride faltered, though only for a heartbeat. His hand moved to his chest, pressing against the leather and fur, as though trying to contain something that threatened to burst free. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a pulling deep in his core, as though invisible threads had suddenly wrapped around his ribs and were drawing him forward. His wolf, that primal part of himself that lived just beneath his skin, stirred with an urgency that bordered on frenzy. "Mine," it whispered in the wordless language of instinct. "Ours. Mate." The word crashed through his consciousness like thunder, shattering the careful walls he had built around his heart. It was impossible. She stood condemned, her fate sealed by his own hand, and yet every fiber of his being screamed at him to stop, to protect, to claim. The bond, that sacred and irrevocable connection that joined fated mates across time and space, had chosen this moment to reveal itself. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. He reached the platform and climbed the steps, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat, counting down to disaster. The executioner stepped aside, yielding to his king's authority. Mailer stood before Morella now, close enough to see the flecks of silver in her gray eyes, close enough to catch her scent beneath the grime and fear. Honeysuckle and rain. Summer storms over wild meadows. It filled his lungs and threatened to undo him completely. "You are Morella Tombstone," he said, his voice carrying across the silent square. Each word carefully controlled, though his insides churned with chaos. "Accused and convicted of practicing forbidden magic in direct violation of the kingdom's laws. Have you any final words before the sentence is carried out?" Morella looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw beyond the crown and the armor to the man beneath. She saw the war being waged behind those ice-pale eyes, the tension in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip of his hands. She felt it too, that inexplicable pull, as though someone had reached into her chest and tied her soul to his with bonds of starlight and shadow. When she spoke, her voice was steady, quiet but clear as a bell in the frozen air. "I healed a child," she said. "He would have died in agony, alone in those woods, if I had not used my gift. You may kill me for showing mercy, Your Majesty, but you cannot make me regret it. If the price of one boy's life is my own, then I pay it gladly. But know this, the universe remembers such exchanges. What you do today, you do not only to me." The crowd murmured, the sound like wind through dead leaves. Some faces showed pity, others righteous satisfaction. But Mailer heard only her words, felt only the truth in them reverberating through the bond that now connected them. His wolf howled inside him, raging against the cage of flesh and duty that held it back. To harm her would be to harm himself, to sever a connection that was meant to last lifetimes. And yet, how could he spare her? To show favoritism now, to overturn a lawful sentence, would undermine everything his rule was built upon. The packs would see weakness. The councils would question his judgment. The very foundations of his authority would crack. "The law exists to protect the kingdom," Mailer said, but even he could hear the hollowness creeping into his words. "Without order, without consequence, we would fall to chaos. Magic of the old ways is forbidden because it is dangerous, unpredictable. How many would suffer if we allowed every person with power to wield it as they saw fit? And how many suffer when we forbid mercy altogether?" Morella countered, her gray eyes never leaving his. "Your laws protect order, Your Majesty, but at the cost of compassion. A child lives because I broke your rules. Tell me, what kind of order demands his death instead?" The words struck him like physical blows. Around them, the crowd's murmuring grew louder, confusion spreading through their ranks. This was not how executions proceeded. The condemned did not engage in philosophical debates with their executioners. The king did not stand frozen, visibly torn, while justice waited to be served. Mailer's second in command, a grizzled warrior named Torsten, with scars that mapped a life of violence, stepped forward. "My lord," he said quietly, his voice pitched for Mailer's ears alone. "The people are watching. You must proceed, or we risk appearing weak." Weak. The word settled over Mailer like a shroud. His entire life had been a battle against that perception. As the youngest son of a king, he had fought for every scrap of respect, had proven himself in blood and steel until even his harshest critics could not deny his strength. He had taken the throne not through birthright, but through capability, had united fractious pacts, and brought stability to a realm teetering on the edge of civil war. And he had done it all by being harder than stone, colder than winter, uncompromising in his judgments. To waver now, to show the very weakness Torsten warned against, would undo decades of carefully constructed authority. But she was his mate, his fated mate. The bond was not something that could be ignored or dismissed. It was written into the very fabric of their beings, as fundamental as breath or heartbeat. To kill her would be to kill a part of himself, to inflict a wound that would never heal, that would fester and rot until it consumed him from the inside out. He had heard the stories of wolves who had lost their mates, seen the hollow-eyed shells they became, more ghost than living creature. "Proceed," Mailer heard himself say, the word torn from his throat like something vital being extracted. "The sentence will be carried out." Morella's eyes widened, not with fear, but with something that looked almost like disappointment. "So be it," she whispered. "But you will remember this moment, Mailer Siegfried. Every day for the rest of your life you will remember." She was right. He knew it with the certainty of sunrise. He would remember. The knowledge would haunt him, would turn his heart to lead, and his days to endless gray. But he had made his choice. Duty over desire, law over love, the kingdom over himself. The executioner stepped forward, guiding Morella toward the block with surprising gentleness. She moved without resistance, her white hair falling forward as she knelt, obscuring her face. The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on the scene before them. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The executioner raised his axe, the blade catching the pale light, and in that moment, time itself seemed to slow to a crawl. Mailer felt his wolf surge forward, felt it slam against the barriers of his control with enough force to make his body shake. "No," it howled. "No, no, no." Every instinct, every ancient piece of his nature, rebelled against what was about to happen. His vision narrowed, the edges going dark as his wolf fought for dominance, fought for the right to protect what was theirs. His muscles tensed, his body coiling like a spring, and before conscious thought could intervene, he was moving. "Stop!" The word exploded from him with the force of an alpha command, the kind of primal order that no wolf could disobey. The executioner froze mid-swing, the axe halting in its arc as though time itself had answered Mailer's call. The crowd gasped, confusion rippling through them like stones thrown into still water. Mailer crossed the distance to Morella in 3 long strides, his hand wrapping around her arm and pulling her to her feet, with a desperation that bordered on violence. She stumbled against him, her body colliding with his, and the contact sent a shockwave through them both. The bond, already straining, flared to life with an intensity that stole breath and reason. Mailer looked down at her, at this woman with eyes like storm clouds and hair like moonlight, and felt the last of his carefully maintained control shatter like glass. "You are not dying today," he said, his voice rough with emotion he could not name. "Not by my hand. Not by any hand." Morella stared up at him, her lips parted in shock. "What are you doing?" she breathed. "Something incredibly foolish," Mailer admitted, "or perhaps the only sane thing I have ever done. I do not yet know which." He turned to face the crowd, keeping Morella behind him, shielding her with his body. "This woman's sentence is stayed," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "She will be remanded to my personal custody for further investigation. If anyone has objection, they may voice it now." The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke. No one dared. They had seen the change in their king, seen something in his face that transcended law and logic. Even Torsten, loyal to the end, simply nodded his acceptance, though his eyes held questions that would need answering later. Mailer did not wait for the crowd to recover. He swept Morella up, carrying her away from the platform, away from the executioner's block, away from the death that had been seconds from claiming her. She did not struggle, did not speak, simply pressed her face against his furs and trembled with the aftermath of terror and reprieve. He carried her through the palace gates, through corridors of stone and shadow, guards stepping aside without question at his approach. His private chambers were in the highest tower, a place of solitude where he retreated from the weight of the crown. He shouldered the heavy door open and stepped inside, finally setting Morella down on her feet near the fire that burned eternally in the massive hearth. For a long moment, they simply stood there, looking at each other in the dancing firelight. Morella's red dress was even more tattered than he had realized, stained with dirt and torn in places that suggested rough handling by guards who had not bothered with gentleness for someone condemned to die. Her white hair hung in tangles down her back, and her feet, bare against the stone floor, were cut and bruised. Yet despite it all, despite the degradation and fear she had endured, there was a dignity to her that nothing could diminish. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you stop it?" Mailer moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He handed one to her, noting the way her fingers shook as she accepted it. "Because," he said slowly, choosing each word with care, "I felt something when I looked at you, something I have never felt before. And I believe, though it seems impossible, that you felt it too." Morella took a sip of the drink, the alcohol burning its way down her throat, grounding her in the reality of the moment. "The bond," she said. "Not a question, but a statement of fact. I felt it, like a rope pulling tight between us. I thought I was imagining it, that fear was making me see things that were not there." "You were not imagining it," Mailer confirmed. He drained his own glass in one swallow, welcoming the burn. "You are my fated mate, Morella Tombstone. The universe, in its infinite wisdom or its infinite cruelty, has bound us together. I felt it the moment I saw you, and it nearly destroyed me to proceed with your execution despite knowing it. But you did proceed," Morella pointed out, a note of steel entering her voice. "You gave the order. You would have let them kill me if your wolf had not forced your hand at the last moment." The accusation stung because it was true. "Yes," Mailer admitted, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I would have. Because I am a king before I am a man, and the law must be upheld, even when it tears me apart to do so. But I could not follow through. When it came to the final moment, I could not watch you die." "How convenient for both of us," Morella said, and there was a bitterness in her tone that he had not expected. "You get to keep your precious law intact while also saving your mate. Tell me, Your Majesty, what happens now? Do you keep me here as your prisoner, your pet, a dirty secret hidden away in your tower while you rule your kingdom with your iron fist?" "I do not know," Mailer said honestly. "I stopped your execution on instinct, not strategy. I have not thought beyond keeping you alive." "Well, that is a start, I suppose," Morella said. She set her glass down and moved closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the flames. "But it is not enough. If we are truly bound, if this bond is real and unbreakable, then we need to understand what it means. For you, for me, for this kingdom that seems to value order above all else, including life." Mailer watched her, this woman who had faced death with courage and now faced him with equal fearlessness. "You are not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" Morella asked, glancing at him over her shoulder. "A simpering, grateful little Omega, who would fall at your feet in thanks for sparing her life? I am grateful, do not misunderstand me. But gratitude does not erase the fact that you were prepared to kill me for the crime of compassion. It does not erase that somewhere in your kingdom there is a boy who walks on 2 healthy legs because I defied your law. If the bond had not revealed itself, I would be dead right now. And that boy's life would be the only thing to mark my existence. That is the truth we must both live with. Her words settled over the room like snow, cold and undeniable. Mailer found himself without response, because what could he say? She was right. In any other circumstance, had she not been his mate, he would have carried out the execution without hesitation. The law demanded it, and he was nothing if not a servant to law. "I am a monster," he said finally, the admission tasting like ash on his tongue. "I have always known it, but I justified it by telling myself that monsters are sometimes necessary, that someone must be willing to make the hard choices, to do the terrible things that keep chaos at bay. But you showed mercy when the law forbid it, and for that, I nearly killed you. What does that make me?" Morella turned to face him fully, and in the firelight, her eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. "It makes you human," she said softly. "Flawed, conflicted, capable of both great cruelty and, as you proved today, great courage. You are not a monster, Mailer Siegfried. You are simply a man trying to bear a burden that would crush most. But if we are to have any chance, if this bond is to be anything more than a curse, you must be willing to change. Not who you are, but how you see the world. There is strength in mercy, just as there is weakness in inflexibility." "Change," Mailer repeated, as though testing the word's weight. "I built my entire rule on being unchanging, on being the constant in a world of variables. To change now would be to admit I was wrong." "No," Morella said, stepping closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body, smell the honeysuckle scent that marked her as his. "To change would be to admit that you grew, that you learned. There is no shame in that, only in refusing to do so when faced with truth." He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she did not, his fingers brushed against her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin, despite the hardship she had endured. "I do not know how to be anything other than what I am," he confessed. "Then learn," Morella said simply. "We will learn together, you and I. Because like it or not, we are bound now. Your fate is my fate, and mine is yours. We navigate this together, or we drown separately." Mailer felt something in his chest loosen, some knot of tension he had not even known he was carrying. "Together," he repeated, and the word felt like a promise, like an oath more binding than any he had spoken at his coronation. "Very well. Together." The days that followed were unlike anything either of them had anticipated. Mailer, so used to solitude, found himself constantly aware of Morella's presence in his chambers. She moved through the space like a ghost, touching things with curious fingers, asking questions that no one had dared ask him in years. Where did he come from? What had his childhood been like? What dreams had he buried beneath the weight of the crown? At first he deflected, giving vague answers that revealed nothing of substance. But Morella was patient, persistent in the way that water wears down stone, and gradually, piece by piece, he found himself opening to her, sharing stories he had locked away, confessing doubts and fears he had never voiced aloud. He learned about her in turn, about the small village she had grown up in, the parents she had lost to plague when she was barely more than a child, about the grandmother who had taught her the old magic, the healing arts that predated the kingdom's laws, that came from a time when wolves and witches lived in harmony rather than conflict, about the loneliness of being different, of carrying power that had to be hidden lest it bring destruction down upon her head. "I knew I would be caught eventually," she admitted one evening, as they shared a meal by the fire. Mailer had insisted on having food brought for them both, refusing to let her eat alone or be treated as anything less than an honored guest, despite the confusion it caused among the servants. "Every time I used my magic, I was rolling dice with fate, but I could not stop. Every person I could help, every child I could save, It felt like the reason I was given this gift in the first place. To let them suffer, to let them die, when I had the power to prevent it, that would have been the real crime. The law would disagree, Mailer said, though there was less conviction in his voice than there once had been. The law is written by people, Morella countered, and people are fallible. We create rules to protect ourselves, to create order from chaos. But sometimes those rules outlive their purpose. Sometimes they become chains rather than safeguards. Your law against magic was born from fear, was it not? Fear of the unknown, of power that could not be easily controlled or understood. Mailer was silent for a long moment, considering her words. There were wars, he said finally. Before my grandfather's time, magic users nearly tore the kingdom apart, each faction believing their way was the only path. Blood magic, death magic, dark rituals that consumed innocence. My grandfather banned it all, made no distinction between healing and harming, because he believed that any magic, given time, would corrupt its wielder. Better to forbid it entirely than risk another war. And so the innocent suffered alongside the guilty, Morella said. The healers were punished with the dark practitioners. Nuance was sacrificed for simplicity. But the world is not simple, Mailer. It never has been. And trying to make it so through rigid laws only creates more suffering. What would you have me do? Mailer asked, and there was a genuine plea in his voice. I cannot simply overturn centuries of law because my mate believes differently. The packs would rebel. The councils would fracture. I would lose everything I have built. Morella reached across the space between them and took his hand in hers. The touch sent warmth flooding through him, the bond humming with satisfaction at the contact. Start small, she said. You do not need to change everything overnight. But you could begin a conversation. You could appoint a commission to study the old laws, to determine which still serve their purpose, and which have become instruments of oppression. You could show your people that strength does not mean inflexibility, that a good king adapts to serve his kingdom, rather than forcing his kingdom to contort itself to serve him. You ask for revolution, Mailer said, but he did not pull his hand away. I ask for evolution, Morella corrected. There is a difference. Revolution destroys and rebuilds from nothing. Evolution takes what is and refines it, improves it, allows it to become something better, while retaining what was valuable about what came before. That night, Mailer lay awake long after Morella had fallen asleep in the adjoining chamber he had given her. He stared at the ceiling, watching shadows dance in the darkness, and thought about her words. Evolution, not revolution. Refinement, not destruction. It was a compelling vision, one that spoke to parts of him he had thought long dead, buried beneath duty and pragmatism. But it was also terrifying. To change meant to risk. To risk meant potential loss. And he had already lost so much in his ascent to power, had already sacrificed pieces of himself, until he sometimes wondered if anything human remained beneath the crown and title. Yet with Morella, he felt something stirring, some long-dormant part of his soul waking from its slumber. When she looked at him, she did not see the Alpha King, the cold and calculated ruler. She saw Mailer, the man, with all his flaws and uncertainties. And somehow, impossibly, she did not flinch away from what she found there. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, fed by proximity and conversation, by shared meals and stolen glances. It was more than physical attraction, though he would be lying to claim he did not notice the curve of her neck, the way firelight caught in her white hair, the soft sounds she made in her sleep. It was deeper than that, a recognition that transcended flesh. Soul calling to soul across whatever distance had kept them apart, before fate had brought them colliding together. 2 weeks after the failed execution, everything changed again. Mailer was in his study, poring over reports from the border territories, when Torsten burst in without knocking. The warrior's face was grim, his jaw set in the way that meant trouble. "My lord," Torsten said. We have a situation. One of the council members, Lord Brennan, has called for Morella Tombstone to be surrendered to the courts for proper judgment. He claims that by keeping her in your custody, you are subverting justice and setting a dangerous precedent. Mailer's blood ran cold. He had known this moment would come, had been dreading it since the day he had pulled Morella from the executioner's block. But he had hoped for more time, more opportunity to solidify his position before facing this challenge. What support does he have? Mailer asked, his voice carefully neutral. More than I would like, Torsten admitted. 3 other council members have added their voices to his. They are calling for a formal hearing to determine whether your actions were lawful or whether you acted in defiance of your own laws. And if the hearing determines I acted unlawfully? Torsten's silence was answer enough. A king who placed himself above his own laws was no better than a tyrant, and tyrants did not remain on thrones for long. The Pax had removed kings before, when their rule became intolerable. It was a last resort, a bloody and violent process, but not unheard of. Call the council, Mailer said after a moment. Tonight, we will address this directly rather than allowing it to fester. And Torsten, increase the guard around my chambers. If they cannot challenge me through legal means, some may resort to less civilized methods. You think they would try to take her by force? Torsten asked, his hand moving instinctively to his sword. I think desperate men do desperate things, Mailer replied, and I will not give them the opportunity to test my defenses. When Torsten left, Mailer sat alone in his study for a long time, trying to formulate a strategy that would satisfy both the law and his bond. But no easy answer presented itself. He had bent the law in sparing Morella, had stayed her execution on grounds that were ultimately personal rather than legal. Now those actions were coming due, and the price might be higher than he could afford to pay. He found Morella in the library, a room she had discovered in her explorations of his chambers and claimed as her own. She sat curled in a large chair by the window, a thick tome open in her lap, afternoon sunlight turning her white hair to spun silver. She looked up as he entered, and her smile faded when she saw his expression. What is wrong? She asked, setting the book aside. Mailer crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. The council has called for a hearing, he said without preamble. They want you surrendered for trial. They are challenging my authority to have stayed your execution. Morella's face paled, but her voice remained steady. Will you give me to them? No, Mailer said immediately, the word torn from somewhere deep and primal. His wolf snarled at even the suggestion, the idea of surrendering their mate unthinkable. But I must face them, must defend my actions before the council. If I cannot convince them, if they determine I acted outside the law, the consequences will be severe. For both of us. Then we fight, Morella said simply. She reached out, cupping his face in her hands, and the bond flared between them, warm and reassuring. Together, remember? We do not run. We do not hide. We stand and face what comes, and we trust that the truth is stronger than fear. You have remarkable faith for someone who nearly died because of these laws, Mailer said, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. I have faith in you, Morella corrected. In us. In this bond that the universe itself forged. If we are meant to be together, then we will find a way through this. And if we are not, well, at least I will have known what it feels like to be seen, truly seen, by another soul. That evening, the council chamber was packed. The 5 council members sat in their high-backed chairs, their faces grave. Behind them, observers filled every available space, nobles and pack leaders who had come to witness what might be the most consequential hearing in the kingdom's recent history. Mailer entered with Morella at his side, refusing to leave her behind or treat her as anything less than his equal. If they were going to challenge his bond, his mate, then let them do so to both their faces. Lord Brennan, a florid-faced man with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of flint, stood to address the assembly. "We are here," he began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, "to determine whether our king acted within the bounds of law when he stayed the execution of Morella Tombstone, a convicted practitioner of forbidden magic. The law is clear on this matter. The use of such magic is punishable by death, with no provisions for exceptions or stays. Yet our king, in a moment of, shall we say, emotional compromise, chose to set aside this sentence. We must now determine whether such an action was lawful, or whether it represents a dangerous precedent that places personal desire above the rule of law." Mailer stood, and the room fell silent. "I stayed Morella Tombstone's execution," he said, his voice clear and unwavering, "because in the moment before it would have been carried out, I discovered she is my fated mate." The bond revealed itself with a force that could not be denied or ignored. Now, you may argue that the law makes no exceptions for such circumstances, and you would be correct. But I ask you this: what kind of king would I be if I allowed the death of my own mate, the one the universe itself chose for me, simply because our laws did not account for such a situation? "The kind who honors his own laws above his personal wishes," Lord Brennan shot back. "The kind who recognizes that no one, not even the king, is above the rules that govern us all. If you can set aside a lawful sentence for your mate, what prevents you from doing so for a friend, an ally, anyone who provides you with personal benefit? Where does it end, Your Majesty?" "It ends with wisdom and discernment," Mailer replied. "Yes, I acted in my own interest, but I also acted in the interest of this kingdom. A king without his mate is incomplete, compromised in ways that affect his judgment and his ability to rule effectively. By saving Morella, I saved myself, and in doing so, I preserved the stability of this realm. Would you prefer a broken, half-mad king ruling over you? Because that is what I would have become had I allowed her execution to proceed. The bond is not a suggestion or a preference. It is a fundamental aspect of what we are as a people." Another council member, Lady Evelina, a sharp-eyed woman with silver streaking through her dark hair, spoke up. "But she still broke the law, Your Majesty. Regardless of whether she is your mate, the crime was committed. What of the boy she healed? What precedent does it set if we allow magic to be used, even in mercy, without consequence?" Morella stepped forward before Mailer could respond. "May I speak?" she asked, her voice carrying surprising authority for someone in her position. Lord Brennan looked ready to object, but Mailer nodded. "The accused has the right to address her accusers," he said. "Speak, Morella." Morella turned to face the council, her white hair catching the light from the torches that lined the chamber walls. "I broke your law," she said simply. "I do not deny it, nor would I if given the choice again. But I ask you to consider what that law demands. A child, 8 years old, caught in a hunter's trap, his leg shattered, infection already setting in. He would have died in agony, alone in those woods, if I had not helped him. Your law says I should have walked away, should have let nature take its course. But what kind of society have you built if the price of order is the suffering of innocence? What kind of people are you if you condemn mercy as a crime? The law protects us from chaos, Lord Brennan insisted. Magic, unchecked, has nearly destroyed this kingdom before. We cannot simply allow it because the wielder's intentions seem pure. Then regulate it, Morella said. Test those who would use it. Create guidelines and oversight. But do not throw away a tool that could save lives simply because you fear what it might do in the wrong hands. Every knife in your kitchens could be used to murder, yet you do not ban knives. You teach proper use and punish misuse. Why should magic be any different? The council chamber erupted in murmurs, voices rising as people argued with their neighbors. Mailer watched the room, trying to gauge the mood, and found it mixed. Some faces showed agreement, others deep skepticism. The question was far from settled. Enough, Mailer said, his alpha command cutting through the noise like a blade. Silence fell immediately. The council will adjourn to deliberate. We will reconvene tomorrow evening for their decision. Until then, Morella Tombstone remains in my custody and under my protection. Any who attempt to circumvent this will answer to me personally. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Several council members shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared challenge him directly. The hearing adjourned, the crowd filing out in clusters, their conversations animated as they debated what they had witnessed. Mailer and Morella returned to his chambers in tense silence. Once inside, with the door secured behind them, Morella finally let out the breath she had been holding. "That went better than I feared," she admitted, "but worse than I hoped." "You spoke well," Mailer said, moving to pour them both drinks. "You gave them something to think about, planted seeds of doubt. Whether those seeds will take root in time, I cannot say." "And if they do not?" Morella asked, accepting the glass he offered. "If the council rules against you?" "Then we run," Mailer said bluntly. "I will not give you up, Morella. Not to them, not to anyone. If the choice is between my throne and my mate, I choose you. Let that be clear." Morella stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. "You would give up your kingdom? Everything you have built? Everything you are, just to keep me safe?" "You are not just anything," Mailer said, setting his glass aside and moving to stand before her. He took her hands in his, marveling at how small they seemed in his larger grip, how delicate and yet how strong. "You are my mate, my fated mate, the other half of my soul. Without you, this kingdom, this throne, all of it means nothing. I have spent my entire life building walls, convincing myself that duty was enough, that I did not need connection or love or anything beyond the cold satisfaction of a job well done. But then you appeared, and suddenly I could see how empty it all was, how hollow. You showed me that there is more to life than mere survival, than simply enduring. You showed me what it means to truly live." Tears spilled down Morella's cheeks, catching the firelight like diamonds. "I am terrified," she whispered. "Terrified of what loving you might cost. Terrified of what might happen if we fail. But I am more terrified of losing you, of never knowing what we could have been together." Mailer pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, feeling her body fit against his as though they had been carved from the same stone and then separated, only to finally be rejoined. "Then let us be terrified together," he murmured into her hair. "Let us face whatever comes with the knowledge that we are stronger united than we ever were apart." They stood like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other, letting the bond weave tighter around them. When they finally pulled apart, something had shifted between them, some final barrier crumbling. Mailer cupped Morella's face in his hands and kissed her, slow and deep, pouring everything he could not say into the contact. She responded with equal intensity, her fingers tangling in his golden hair, her body pressing against his with a need that matched his own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mailer rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me tonight," he said, not a command but a request. "Not because I demand it, but because I need you. Because the thought of sleeping alone, of waking without you near, is unbearable." "Yes," Morella breathed. "Yes, I will stay." They moved to his bedchamber, and for the first time since the bond had revealed itself, they came together completely, body and soul intertwining as the universe had always intended. There was tenderness in their joining, but also urgency, the knowledge that tomorrow might tear them apart, lending a desperate edge to their passion. When it was over, when they lay tangled together in the aftermath, Mailer held Morella close and made a silent vow. Whatever the council decided, whatever the kingdom demanded, he would not lose her. Not now, not ever. The next evening arrived too quickly. Mailer and Morella dressed in silence, both knowing that the coming hours would determine the course of their lives. The council chamber was even more crowded than before, word having spread throughout the kingdom that a decision was imminent. Mailer could feel the weight of all those eyes on him, on them, judging and waiting. The council members filed in, their faces unreadable. Lord Brennan stood, and Mailer braced himself for the worst. "We have deliberated through the night," Brennan began, his voice formal and grave. "The question before us was whether the king acted lawfully in staying the execution of Morella Tombstone. After much discussion and debate, we have reached our conclusion." The pause that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Mailer's hand found Morella's, their fingers intertwining, drawing strength from the contact. "We find," Brennan continued, "that while the king's actions were unprecedented and contrary to the letter of the law, they were not contrary to its spirit. The law exists to protect the kingdom and its people. A king without his mate is, as His Majesty argued, compromised in his ability to rule effectively. Furthermore, the case brought before us has illuminated flaws in our current legal framework, particularly regarding the blanket prohibition of all magical practices regardless of intent or effect. Therefore, we rule that the execution stay stands. Morella Tombstone will not face death for her actions. However, she will be placed under the supervision of a newly formed Council of Magical Regulation, which will oversee the development of guidelines for the lawful use of healing magic within strict parameters. The chamber erupted. Some voices rose in celebration, others in outrage. But Mailer heard only the roaring in his ears, felt only the overwhelming relief flooding through him. They had won. Not completely, not without compromise. But they had won. Morella was safe. The bond was safe. And perhaps, just perhaps, they had planted the seeds for real change. He turned to Morella and found her crying, her face radiant with joy and disbelief. "We did it," she whispered. "Mailer, we actually did it." "No," Mailer corrected, pulling her into his arms despite the crowd, despite propriety, despite everything. "You did it. You stood before them and spoke truth to power. You changed minds that I thought unchangeable. You are extraordinary, Morella Tombstone, and I am honored beyond measure to call you mine." "And I you," Morella said, rising on her toes to kiss him. The crowd's noise faded to background as they lost themselves in each other, celebrating not just their victory, but their survival, their love, their future. In the weeks that followed, things began to change in the kingdom. Slowly at first, like ice melting at winter's end, but undeniably. The Council of Magical Regulation was established, and Morella was appointed as its head advisor. She threw herself into the work with a passion that Mailer found both admirable and slightly terrifying. She was relentless in her pursuit of balance, creating frameworks that would allow beneficial magic while still protecting against abuse. Mailer watched her navigate the political landscape with growing respect. She was a natural leader, commanding respect not through force but through competence and compassion. Where he had ruled through strength and intimidation, she led through inspiration and collaboration. Together, they formed a partnership that neither could have achieved alone. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. The initial urgency of the bond gave way to something richer, more nuanced. They learned each other's rhythms, their preferences and quirks. Mailer discovered that Morella hummed while she worked, little fragments of melodies that had no name. Morella learned that Mailer had nightmares, echoes of battles fought and decisions made, and that he slept better with her beside him, her presence a ward against the darkness. 6 months after the hearing, Mailer made his decision. He called Morella to the throne room, which he had ordered cleared of everyone but themselves. She entered looking curious, her white hair now cleaned and brushed until it shone, wearing a dress of deep blue that he had commissioned for her, though she still occasionally wore the old red one when she wanted to remember where she had come from. "You summon me, Your Majesty?" she asked with a playful smile, knowing how the formal title both amused and irritated him in private. "I did," Maelor said. He stood from his throne and descended the steps to stand before her. "Morella Tombstone, from the moment I saw you standing in that execution square, my life has not been my own. You have challenged me, changed me, forced me to confront truths I had long avoided. You have made me a better king. But more importantly, you have made me a better man." He dropped to one knee, and Morella's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes widening with understanding. From his pocket, Maelor drew a ring, a simple band of silver etched with ancient symbols that represented the bond between mates. "I know that the bond already ties us together," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want more than fate's decree. I want your choice. I want you to choose me, freely and without obligation, the way I choose you every day. Mirella, will you marry me? Will you stand beside me as my queen, my partner, my mate in all things?" Mirella was crying again, but these were tears of joy. She dropped to her knees before him, taking his face in her hands. "You impossible, infuriating, beautiful man," she said through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I choose you, Maelor Siegfried. I chose you the moment you stopped that axe from falling. I chose you when you risked everything to defend me. And I will keep choosing you, every day for the rest of our lives." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had always been meant to rest there. Then he kissed her, pouring everything he felt into the contact, all the love and gratitude and awe that she inspired in him. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling, faces wet with tears neither bothered to hide. The wedding took place 3 months later, a grand affair that brought together packs from across the kingdom. It was both a celebration and a statement, a declaration that their king had found his queen, that the bond between them was recognized and honored. Morella wore white, her hair adorned with silver chains and winter flowers, looking every inch the queen she was about to become. Maelor wore his finest ceremonial armor, but it was the expression on his face as he watched Morella approach that people would remember most, a look of such open adoration that it made even the hardest warriors shift uncomfortably. They spoke their vows before the assembled packs, promises of loyalty and love, of partnership and protection. When the ceremony concluded, and they were proclaimed king and queen, alpha and mate, the roar of approval from the crowd shook the very foundations of the palace. That night, as they lay together in their chambers, now officially and irrevocably bound by both fate and choice, Morella traced the scars on Maelor's chest, each mark a story she was learning to read. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Stopping my execution? Choosing me over the easy path?" Maelor caught her hand and brought it to his lips. "Never," he said firmly. "You are the best decision I ever made, Morella. You showed me that strength does not mean being unbreakable, that power is not the same as rigidity. You taught me that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same, and that real courage is not in refusing to change, but in having the wisdom to know when change is necessary." "We still have so much work to do," Morella said. "The Magical Council is making progress, but there is resistance. Some will never accept that the old ways can coexist with the new." "Then we will face that resistance together," Maelor said. "As we face everything, side by side. That is what it means to be mated, to be partners. We do not carry our burdens alone anymore." Years passed, and the kingdom transformed. The Magical Council's work bore fruit, and healers began to emerge from hiding, their gifts no longer a death sentence but a valued resource. There were setbacks, moments when old fears threatened to overwhelm progress, but Maelor and Morella weathered them all. They ruled as true partners, complementing each other's strengths, covering each other's weaknesses. They had children, A daughter with her mother's white hair and her father's pale eyes, and a son who inherited Maelor's golden locks and Morella's gift for magic. The palace, once a cold and imposing fortress, became a home filled with laughter and life. Maelor, who had thought himself incapable of softness, found himself reading bedtime stories and playing silly games, discovered that there were many kinds of strength, and some of the most important had nothing to do with swords or commands. On the 10th anniversary of the day Morella had almost died, they returned to the execution square together. It had been transformed, the dark platform removed, and in its place a garden had been planted. White flowers bloomed there now, fed by a spring that bubbled up from the cobblestones, as though the earth itself sought to wash away the memory of blood with beauty. They stood hand in hand in the center of that garden, and Morella turned to Maelor with a soft smile. "Do you remember what I told you that day?" she asked. "That you would remember the moment for the rest of your life?" "I do," Maelor said. "And you were right. I remember every detail. The cold, the fear, the moment I felt the bond snap into place. But what I remember most is the choice that followed. Not the choice to spare you. That was instinct, pure and simple. But the choice to truly see you, to listen, to allow you to change me. That is what I remember. That is what defined everything that came after." "We were so lucky," Morella said softly. "The universe could have chosen differently. We might never have met, or met too late, or met under circumstances that made the bond impossible to honor." "I do not believe in luck," Maelor said, pulling her close. "I believe we were meant to find each other, that every choice we made, every path we walked, led us to that moment in the square. And I believe that what we built together, what we continue to build, is proof that even the darkest beginnings can lead to light, if we have the courage to reach for it." Morella leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt the bond between them hum with contentment. They had come so far from that frozen morning when death had seemed inevitable. They had faced councils and courts, had fought battles political and personal, had learned to compromise and communicate, to love not just with passion, but with patience and understanding. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Maelor asked, his hand moving to stroke her hair. "For stopping," Morella said simply. "For choosing to see beyond the law to the person, for giving us this chance." Maelor tilted her face up to his and kissed her gently. "I should be thanking you," he said. "You saved me, Morella. Not just from loneliness or isolation, but from becoming a monster in truth. You reminded me of my humanity, taught me that being a good king means more than enforcing laws. It means caring for the people those laws are meant to protect, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." They stood in that garden for a long time, wrapped in each other and in the knowledge of what they had overcome. Around them, the kingdom bustled with life. People going about their days in a land that was slowly learning to balance tradition with progress, order with compassion. It was not perfect, would perhaps never be perfect, but it was better, and that was enough. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Maelor and Morella turned to leave the garden. But before they did, Morella plucked one of the white flowers and tucked it behind her ear. A small rebellion. A tiny act of beauty in a world that had once demanded only her death. Maelor smiled at the gesture, seeing in it everything he loved about her. Her strength, her defiance, her insistence on finding joy even in places marked by sorrow. They walked back to the palace together, their hands clasped, their steps matched. Behind them, the garden continued to bloom, white flowers nodding in the evening breeze, a testament to transformation, to mercy, to the power of love to change not just individuals, but entire kingdoms. And in the palace tower, their children waited, already arguing over whose turn it was to choose the evening's story, their voices carrying through the corridors like music. Mailer had once thought himself complete, had believed that duty and power were enough to fill a life. But Morella had shown him the lie in that, had cracked open his carefully constructed armor, and found the beating heart beneath. She had taught him that true strength lay not in standing alone, but in daring to share your burdens, your hopes, your very soul with another. And in return, he had given her safety, position, a platform from which to change the world. But more than any of that, they had given each other themselves, flawed and complicated and absolutely perfect in their imperfection. They had chosen each other, continued to choose each other, every single day. And in that choosing, in that daily recommitment to their bond, they had found something more precious than crowns or kingdoms. They had found home. As night fell over the realm, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across velvet, Mailer stood at his chamber window with Morella in his arms. "I love you," he said. The words still new enough to feel momentous, familiar enough to feel like truth. "I will love you until the stars fall from the sky and the world forgets the meaning of dawn." "And I love you," Morella replied, turning in his arms to face him. "From the moment before the axe fell to this moment, and all the moments yet to come. You are mine, Mailer Siegfried, as I am yours. And nothing, not law nor custom nor the passage of time itself, will ever change that." They kissed then, a kiss that held promises and memories, that tasted of honeysuckle and rain, of summer storms and winter nights. It was a kiss that had been worth waiting for, worth nearly dying for, worth revolutionizing a kingdom for. And as they lost themselves in each other, the bond between them sang with a joy so profound it might have been the universe itself celebrating what it had wrought. For they were fated, these two. The Alpha King who had learned mercy, and the healer who had taught him love. They were fated from the moment time began, their souls always meant to find each other across whatever distances separated them. And now that they had claimed each other against all odds and obstacles, nothing could tear them apart. They were bound, not just by fate or law or ceremony, but by choice, by the daily, deliberate decision to see each other, to honor each other, to love each other with everything they possessed. And in the end, that choice, that commitment, was the greatest magic of all. More powerful than any spell, more enduring than any crown, more transformative than any law. It was the magic of two souls recognizing their other half and deciding, against all reason and resistance, to become whole. And in that wholeness, they found not just happiness, but purpose. Not just love, but meaning. Not just survival, but a life worth living. The story of the Alpha King who nearly executed his fated mate became legend in time, told and retold around fires and in taverns, embellished and altered with each telling. But those who had lived it, who had watched it unfold, knew the truth was more remarkable than any fiction. They had witnessed transformation, had seen two people change each other and, in doing so, change the world around them. And years later, when Mailer and Morella had grown old together, their hair silver and their faces lined with the map of a life well lived, they would still return to that garden on the anniversary of the day everything changed. They would stand among the white flowers and remember, not with pain, but with gratitude. Grateful for the bond that had saved them both. Grateful for the courage to choose each other. Grateful for every day they had been given to love and be loved in return. For in the end, that was what mattered. Not thrones or titles, not laws or legacies, but love. Simple, complicated, impossible, inevitable love. The kind of love that stops axes mid-swing and rewrites the rules of kingdoms. The kind of love that transforms monsters into men and healers into queens. The kind of love that once found can never be lost, because it becomes part of who you are, woven into your very being until there is no separating yourself from it. And so they lived, Mailer and Morella, alpha king and queen, fated mates and chosen partners, loving each other with a ferocity that time could not diminish, and a tenderness that adversity could not harden. They lived and they loved, and they built a kingdom that reflected the best of both of them, a place where strength and compassion walked hand in hand, where laws served people rather than the reverse, where mercy was not a crime, but a virtue. They lived, and their story echoed through generations, a testament to the transformative power of love, to the courage required to change, to the beauty that can bloom even in the darkest places when we dare to reach for light. And though they were just two people, one king and one healer, their love changed the world. Not all at once, not without struggle, but surely and completely. The way dawn changes night, slowly and then all at once, until darkness is nothing but a memory and the world is bathed in gold. And in that golden light, in the warmth of love realized and honored and nurtured across a lifetime, Mailer and Morella found their happy ending. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and true and absolutely theirs. A love story written not in the stars, but in the choices they made, the compassion they showed, the faith they kept in each other and in the bond that had saved them both. This was their story, the Alpha King and his fated mate. And it was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth believing in. Because it proved that even in the darkest moments, when the axe is falling and all seems lost, love can intervene. Love can stop time. Love can change everything. And sometimes, if we are very lucky and very brave, love can give us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it, and transform our lives into something more beautiful than we ever dared imagine. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.